Today is the first day of the inquest at the Gauteng High Court in Pretoria into the Life Esidimeni tragedy. In the coming 2 weeks, presiding Judge Monwa Tefo will hear oral arguments from all parties involved to determine the cause of the deaths of the 141 mental health care patients after they were moved from Life Esidimeni into unlicensed and unsuitable NGOs. This was back in 2016. Section 27 says it will argue that former Gauteng Health MEC, Tedani Mahlangu, former Director of Mental Health Directorate, Dr. Makgabo Manamela, and the owner of Precious Angels NGOs should be charged for culpable homicide. The Right to Healthcare Public Interest Group represents 44 mental health care users out of the 141. Section 27 Executive Director Sasha Stevenson joins us now ahead of the first day of the inquest. Sasha, it's good to have you. Thanks so much for talking to us. I mean, this certainly has been a very long and excruciating 7 years, especially for the families, since the death of 141 patients under the care of the state. This is all the way back in 2016. Perhaps you can remind us of the timeline of the events very quickly leading up to where we find ourselves.
Yes, surely. And so it has been a very long process. It started in 2015 when there was an announcement that there was a decision to terminate the contract with Life Esidimeni, and many attempts were made by experts, by NGOs, by families to dissuade the Department of Health against taking this decision and moving people. We went to court twice. There were protests, there were letters, there were engagements, but we weren't successful. And the mental health care users were moved out of Life Esidimeni into NGOs that were not prepared, that were not qualified, that were not resourced to take care of people with the mental illnesses, intellectual disabilities, and in some cases, physical disabilities and physical illnesses that these people experienced. And people started to die, and they died in horrific circumstances of clear neglect. Yeah. In 2017-18, we had the Life Esidimeni arbitration before former Deputy Chief Justice Dikgang Moseneke. And what came out of that was firstly an admission by government that government was responsible for the tragedy, and some relief in the form of compensation for our clients that was paid very promptly. And there have been some processes after that of people who came forward after the arbitration whose compensation was not paid so promptly. And then we've had this inquest, which started in July 2021. We've had 130 days of hearing over these 2 years. We've had 40 witnesses being heard from and 56,000 pages of evidence. And now this week, starting today, we get into the legal argument. So that is where lawyers for the families like us, representing 44 bereaved families, and the other lawyers representing implicated people, other witnesses, and other bereaved families will be making oral argument about what we say the judge should do in her ruling in this case.
And this is a very important part that we find ourselves at, because this is where we're hoping, or certainly from your perspective, the families and Section 27 is hoping that there actually may be some criminal charges now being pressed against at least 3 people for the deaths of these mental health care patients. So the people you certainly are looking at is Dr. Mahlangu, Dr. Manamela, and Ms. Ncube, who was the owner at the time of the Precious Angels NGO. They took in some of those that were mentally ill, and they had absolutely no facilities to look after them, and they kept on taking people in, and they were passing away in their hands. Perhaps you want to talk to us about the basis of these 3 that you are targeting.
That's right. Yes. So to start with, it's important to recognize what the purpose of an inquest is. An inquest is meant to determine the legal cause of death of somebody who has died in unnatural causes, and then to determine whether there is any person whose conduct on the face of it caused or contributed to the death. So it's a precursor for prosecution. Once the judge makes her findings here, the matter will then go to the National Prosecution Authority to decide whether they are going to, indeed to prosecute people. As you say, we are arguing that there there are three people about whom those recommendations should be made. The first is the former MEC for Health in the province, Ms. Mahlangu. And Ms. Mahlangu, we're arguing, made the decision to terminate the contract with Life Esidimeni and then was very involved in the implementation of that decision. She chaired project management meetings. She received a lot of concerns and complaints from experts, from psychiatrists inside and outside the department, from other officials inside the department, from families who engaged in protests, from organizations like SADAG and us. And she failed to take the action that one would expect of a reasonable person to prevent the disaster that she was warned of. Dr. Manamela was the director of mental health. She was the person in charge of mental health in the province, and she was the de facto leader of the project. She herself was involved in implementation. She also delegated responsibilities to others and received reports from others. Importantly, she signed licenses for NGOs that she knew hadn't been properly assessed and that in fact were certainly not places where mental health care users should be living. And on that basis, we argue that she should be held responsible and should be charged. And then Ms. Ncube ran an organization called Precious Angels NGO. It was registered as an NPO in the same month that she started taking people. She had no experience, no expertise. She didn't have the staff she needed. She didn't have the resources she needed. She didn't know what she was doing. She took people in over a course of a number of days. She took 56 people. And 10 of them died in horrific circumstances. People were emaciated. People had gangrene. They had bed sores. She was in a particular position as an NGO because of the number of people who died at her facility and because of the dire circumstances of their deaths.
Yeah, I mean, Sasha, it has been established, and we said that right up front, that the healthcare patients died in the most inhumane and degrading circumstances, as you're saying. I mean, people suffering from starvation, from dehydration, gangrene. I mean, you're adding gangrene, neglect, severe violations of their human rights. The government did the right thing, established necessary structures. We know this with the appointment of a panel of 60 experts by the former minister, Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi. What's happened since?
Well, that process was really to determine what should happen. And importantly, at that stage, they needed to move people out of these dangerous situations. The panel was appointed and the health ombud was appointed to investigate towards the end of 2016. And what they did following their appointment was to investigate what had happened, to come to some conclusions, and importantly, to move people who had survived this ordeal out of the dangerous NGOs. And they moved them mostly back into Life Esidimeni facilities, where everyone had been moved out of, and into similar facilities also owned by private companies. So that's what happened to the mental health care users following this disaster. Of course, the people who survived also went through severe and significant trauma, as did their families, and they were included in the arbitration process. But this now is about the deaths, and it's about criminal liability, and it's about whether anyone should be personally held responsible criminally for their actions and their conduct that led to the deaths, and we're arguing that they should be.
Just quick fire questions. The payments that we spoke about up front, those were obviously the retired judge, Chief Justice Dikgang Moseneke, who did that whole arbitration or a hearing, ordered that the families must be paid. Have they all been paid as far as you know? Has that all been sorted out?
So the people who were involved in the arbitration from the beginning, our clients, were paid within 3 months of the order as was required. And then the judge also said that if there are other people who are in similar positions and come forward, he trusts that government would treat them the same way. That process has taken longer to be resolved, but the people who were involved in the arbitration from the beginning were paid the compensation straight off.
I mean, this case has been, as you search through the internet, I mean, this case has been the subject of many theses that people have been writing, including at Harvard University, of how badly things went wrong. The reality and the question that I asked you off air, and I'm going to ask you on air, are there patients still missing? 7 years down the line, we know that there were families that were still desperately searching for loved ones. Do you know if there are still patients actually missing to this date? The
last report we got was quite some time ago, and it suggested that that there were still people missing. We don't represent anyone, and we are not in touch with anyone who hasn't been able to find their loved one. But I think what's relevant here is that when you move people in such a chaotic manner, when you don't assess everybody properly, when you don't assess the places they're going to, when you don't treat people as individual humans with individual needs and individual rights, the fact that people will go missing, the fact that there will be deaths, the fact that there will be suffering is inevitable. And this is what the department was warned right from the beginning by the psychiatrists who said that we cannot move people out of places that have been caring for them for many years, in some cases many decades, without having a proper plan. That's exactly what happened. It's exactly what caused all of this disaster and tragedy and suffering.
Oh, all right, Sasha, thanks for talking to us. Good luck. Let's see what comes out of all of this. Do you think this will be the conclusion? Is this where it ends?
Well, there's still a process after this, because the NPA still has to decide whether to prosecute. So we are not at the end of the road, but we're at an important milestone in a very, very long road, and one that's important for the families to get to accountability in this disaster.
Section 27 Executive Director Sasha Stevenson rounding up the issues ahead of the first day of the 2-week Life Esidimeni inquest, which resumes today.